Hello, and welcome to our lecture on schizophrenia. Schizophrenia, unlike the last couple of disorders we've talked about, like mood disorders with depression and anxiety, those are more like easily to relate to, right? So even if we've never been diagnosed, we all know what it's like to be anxious or to feel depressed or have those things. So schizophrenia, we're going to talk about this one, the dissociative disorder, right, just multiple personality. These are more like extreme abnormal psych diagnoses. So in this lecture, we're going to look at schizophrenia, its causes, its different symptoms, and some factors that we know play a role in predicting schizophrenia. Okay. All right. So schizophrenia, I know sometimes we will talk about, or later we'll talk about multiple personalities, but the term schizophrenia literally means split mind, which is easy to confuse with like split personality. But schizophrenia is not multiple personalities, but meaning more a split from reality, right? So schizophrenia literally means a split mind or a split from reality. We're going to look at a couple different ways that schizophrenics like split from reality in both positive symptoms and negative symptoms. I want you to remember back to our learning unit when we talked about positive and negative do not mean good and bad, right? Just like in correlation doesn't mean good or bad, and learning it doesn't mean good and bad. And the same thing in schizophrenia. Positive and negative relations just mean added and absent, right? So added and absent. Same thing with like positive punishments and negative punishments, right? Not good things, but it means there's something added to the situation or taken away from the situation. All right, so schizophrenia, a split from reality. Let's look at some of the symptoms first. We're going to look at, know the list of them and then be able to tell whether those are positive or negative, right? If it's something that's there that shouldn't be or something that's missing. Okay, so one of the key symptoms of schizophrenia is called disorganized thinking, right? So not clear lines of thinking, and this shows in a couple different ways. One of them is delusions, right? So delusion is a false thought. That's different from an hallucination. So false thought, right? So that's where the cognition comes, disorganized thinking, a false thought. So people who have delusions, like there's like delusions of grandeur, like thinking that, you know, they are the savior of the world, thinking that they are an ancient king that has come back to rule. So these are delusions of grandeur, delusions of persecution, meaning that the government is out to get me. Really extreme conspiracy theories, right? That, and I'm not making this stuff up, that the world is run by aliens in disguise, and that we're all like this, you know, these pawns. Like these are really big false delusions, right? Persecution, being paranoid all the time that they're being watched. Word salad, funny story, not funny story, but I remember taking a test where it says which of the following is not a symptom of schizophrenia, and one of the options was word salad, and I'm like, that's not a thing. What is a word salad? It is a thing. So I got that question wrong. A word salad is where so many words come together, like jumbled thoughts, that sentences that don't make sense, right? So words are out of order. Words come all at once. They're kind of jumbled, not cognitive, fluid thoughts, right? So that's word salad. So these are all delusions, false thoughts, right? Cognition, something wrong with cognition. This and hallucinations, which I'm going to go over in the next slide, are thought to be some type of breakdown in selective attention. This is, I kind of threw in there because it's good review. Remember back in our perception, sensation, and perception is that selective attention is being able to, even though my body right now has things that it can feel, I can hear, I can see, right, touch, taste, but that we're able to attune into just the one thing that we're supposed to, right? That I'm just focusing on looking at the screen right now. If I stop, I can listen to the buzz, right, and kind of focus in, but that somehow schizophrenics have a breakdown in selective attention. They're not able to just tune into one specific thing that they're supposed to be. Okay, so delusions, false thoughts. We'll talk about some of those delusions of grandeur, delusion of persecution. Oh, school's out. I'm done. All right, another symptom of schizophrenia is hallucination. So again, going back to sensation and perception, a hallucination is something that you perceive that doesn't have stimulation, right? So there's no sensory stimulation. So I'm hearing things that aren't there. I'm seeing things that aren't there. We actually, in our drugs of abuse, remember in that, going back way back to Unit 5, right after sensation perception, is there's that category of drugs, hallucinogenics, that cause those same things, right? Sensory perception without sensation, right? So these are a positive, right, symptom of schizophrenia. So like hearing things that aren't there, hearing voices, like seeing people that are not there, right? Voices is the most common one, but another type of hallucination would be seeing things that are not there. Okay. Some of the negative symptoms, again, I'm going to put this back. So negative symptoms being like that things are missing of schizophrenia. So delusions, hallucinations, positive. These are negative symptoms, meaning that you're supposed to feel these things, and you do not, so you're missing them. So inappropriate emotions like flat affect. Flat affect is just the missing of an emotion that should be expressed, right? You should be sad in this situation. You should be happy in this situation. You should laugh in this situation. So inappropriate emotion means that like emotion is missing when it should be present for a reason, right? Someone dies, someone gets hurt, like something good happens. So flat affect is the loss, or not the loss, but like the inability to show those emotions. Inappropriate actions, or the lack of. Catatonia is body frozen, right? So like a frozen state of the body, being catatonic, not talking, not moving, like just kind of staring off, not paying attention or being able to be accessed. And disruptive social behavior just means like that it's not socially accepted for that time, right? So those could be a positive thing. So like, moving up and down when you're supposed to be staying still, like going back and forth, like while talking to yourself, right? Those are inappropriate actions, right? So if it's missing, right, from it, so flat affect and catatonic, those are negative symptoms. Things that are added are positive. We actually have 4 different types of schizophrenia that you need to know about. Five, and then we'll talk about the different onsets. The most common one we probably know about is paranoid schizophrenia, and that is, again, if someone's paranoid, that they're just preoccupied of, like, again, those delusions of things that they see, things that they hear. The movie A Beautiful Mind is about that mathematician, and I don't know, with Russell Crowe, right? So maybe we'll watch it at the end of the year. We'll see. So he was someone who had paranoid schizophrenic. He thought that he worked for the government, and he was trying to uncode these hidden messages in the magazines. Like the magazines had all these hidden messages, and he was decoding for the Communist Party these messages that are being, like in newspapers, right? In everyday newspapers, right? So again, it's often with that theme of like they're being chased, or like there's a grand scheme, like supposed to take over the world, right? Something much bigger going on. Disorganized schizophrenia is categorized by very disorganized speech or behavior, and then the flat or inappropriate emotion, that's more of the flat affect, a lacking of the hallucinations and the delusions. Catatonic, like we just talked about, is immobile, right? So not moving, or excessive, like purposeless movement. If you've ever seen anyone, if you've been, different places, but like people that like walk like back and forth like this, or kind of pacing back and forth, or like purposeless movement, like just going like this, that could be considered like excessive or purposeless. Extreme negative, it's going back to the flat affect, and then the parrot-like speech or movements. Oh, where have I seen that before? But so like watching someone else doing something and then they do the same thing, or if you walk by someone on the street. We'll talk about why homelessness is associated with schizophrenia in just a second. But people that will repeat something that someone just said, or that they overheard, or will kind of mock the person next to them, that's catatonic schizophrenia. Undifferentiated is just when there's like not a cluster of those symptoms, but that's a lot of different things together. And with residual is when after those hallucinations and delusions have disappeared, kind of like the side effects that happen as schizophrenic say symptoms go away. We'll talk about the difference between those in a second. Okay, so those different 5 types of schizophrenia. Okay, when do we see schizophrenia come on? Remember we talked about with anxiety and depression, they kind of go in these different episodes. This is not true of schizophrenia. We see schizophrenia come up most of the time in early adulthood, right? Like late teen, early adulthoods. I kind of skipped back here. Both male and female, we see come out the same times. Males tend to be more sudden and more like the symptoms come on more strongly versus females be a little bit more gradual. But we do see that schizophrenia, we talked about the very first lecture, that schizophrenia is one that we see worldwide. So depression and schizophrenia, all cultures all over the world, we see symptoms of schizophrenia. Affects about 1 in 100 people worldwide, and there's a couple different ways that we see it come on. I'm just kind of skipping around here, but chronic or acute schizophrenia. So this sudden stressor that comes on that creates schizophrenia is called acute schizophrenia. It's almost like we're acute, right? Like a particular moment is very reactive to something that might have just happened. We see schizophrenia come out of very stressful situations like war, homelessness. So then I talk about like homelessness, so losing your home, major loss. Sometimes we see these huge stressors that bring on the symptoms of schizophrenia. Okay, the chronic schizophrenia, so acute reactive schizophrenia is more likely to respond to treatment and has more of the positive symptoms like hallucinations and delusions and excessive movement. Chronic schizophrenia is something that is a process. It comes on over time. We might see symptoms start to kind of show over time, and then they gradually get worse, or we see more symptoms. Chronic schizophrenia is less likely to recover, less likely to be helped with medication, and has more of the negative symptoms, so the flat affect, the catatonic, kind of like withdrawing from social interactions and going away. So what did I skip here? We already went over positive versus negative, is added versus missing, and then chronic versus acute schizophrenia. Okay, so why? So the reason, so we've gone through all of the symptoms of, the categories of, and some of the stats on there. Now let's look at some of the causes. So what causes schizophrenia? So again, from a biological perspective, right? We look at biology, so our brain and our genes. And so looking at the brain of schizophrenics and doing autopsies after, so looking at brains after the fact, people with schizophrenia have been found to have like 6 times the amount of the dopamine receptor, the D4 dopamine receptor. So more receptors in the brain, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that like there's excessive dopamine being released. There might be, but if you have more receptors for it, the brain is going to react more to it, right? So excessive dopamine receptors. And then because dopamine is, do you remember the drugs that release dopamine, like, cocaine, right? So excessive, like, high pleasures, thoughts like that. So if there's more receptors for it, like it intensifies the brain signals. Whatever message was being sent or thing that was being felt is felt intensely. And so the drugs used to treat that are dopamine blockers, right? So we talked about with dopamine way back that too much dopamine leads to schizophrenia, not enough leads to Parkinson's, right? So dopamine is a neurotransmitter in our brain. There's also been some studies that show that there's an increased amount of glutamate. Remember, glutamate is the excitatory, GABA is the inhibitory, right? So increased glutamate. So basically like overactive brains in a lot of different regions. Also looking at brain scans, we've seen in PET scans, right? During people that are having hallucinations, we see a very active thalamus during hallucinations. So overactive on a PET scan places when they're seeing things and hearing things, right? It's in the thalamus that it's going, or increased activity. And low activity in the frontal lobe and the core brain activities. So remember, the frontal lobe here is looking at controlling the rest of the brain. Right, this is where all your executive functions, your problem solving, your organizing your thoughts, last part of your brain to develop right there in the frontal lobe. There's also been this interesting finding of people with schizophrenic brains that there's this area right in the middle that's filled with fluid. We see this huge, or this bigger area that's filled with fluid. So fluid parts of the brains that are, I don't know why that's different. no matter, that might be impeding on that core brain activity. Okay. One of the causes, one of the things that we see highly correlated with schizophrenia is actually a virus. There's a lot of evidence to show that that there might be a virus during pregnancy that brings on this schizophrenia. And I'll tell you why in a second, because we can't, so anyways, we've done these studies on the maternal activity during schizophrenia. So looking at the mother of people that were schizophrenic, and what they have found, so here's the interesting things that make them think that the flu, some type of flu, might be associated with schizophrenic. So first of all, they found that during flu epidemics in the past, we see an increased risk or increased rate of babies being born that ultimately end up being schizophrenic. And we've got to be going quite a far backwards, so like the Spanish flu, like, because we're looking at schizophrenia doesn't come around until like our 20s, right? So we're not talking about anything recent, but we could be, right, with those huge flu epidemics, looking at people that were pregnant during those times have increased rates of children with schizophrenia. We also see high schizophrenic rates or higher schizophrenic rates in places that are highly dense populations, so flu's more likely to be transmitted, and women who are pregnant during winter months, because we know that flu spread more often during winter months. So because of these different studies they've done that kind of show that like when the flu increases during the year, the rates of schizophrenia do, there's a correlation, right? This cannot be done in an experimental way. The virus isn't tested for. It's something that's like looking back on the fact, looking at women who are pregnant who during the flu, high dense populations during winter month have a higher incidence of having children with schizophrenia. We also with schizophrenia see a huge genetic component. We talked a lot about twin studies during, I don't even remember, we did twin studies development, maybe? Yeah, twin studies, looking at twins that were reared together, so like raised together, fraternal versus identical. So we see a higher incidence in identical twins of schizophrenia than we do with fraternal. This is risk of, take all these silly pictures from your book and put them in here, sorry. This is schizophrenic risk of the twins of diagnosed, right? So you see, identical versus fraternal. In all the different countries, we see a higher incidence of identical, meaning that it's more likely associated with some type of genetic gene. All right. And did I put one more? I did. One more graph in here. Just to kind of, I found this later. I thought I'd put it back to go back on all the different disorders we've talked about. Of all of the psychological disorders, looking at the colors here, so we actually see, so schizophrenia is only second to bipolar. So heritability, meaning like if you have a parent that has it, that you're more likely, right, to have a child that has it. So showing that take that back. Looking at identical DNA, so twins, right? So more likely to have the two that happen together. So bipolar, schizophrenic, anorexia, major depressive disorder, and generalized anxiety disorder, right? Looking at those rates with identical DNA. Okay, psychological factors. This is the last slide, don't worry. Psychological factors, so warning signs leading up to it. Schizophrenia is what's considered or possibly to be a trigger gene, meaning that it is not triggered unless there's a stressful situation. So it's very possible that you might have the gene for schizophrenia, but never have schizophrenic or schizophrenic episodes because you were never put in an environmental situation that kind of triggered it. So we talked about like war, homelessness, extreme violence, rape, things like that are sometimes environmental factors that can trigger schizophrenia. But other than that, some possible warning signs, some things that we see leading up to in the, right, looking back on kids when that ended up being schizophrenic, we see that, so first of all, if there's a mother or parent with schizophrenia, any complications during pregnancy, some type of oxygen deprivation, separation from parents, right? So that's a traumatic event, right? Like not being somehow separated from their parents, whether they're death or events. Adults that end up being schizophrenic, look back, tend to have shorter attention spans as children and poor muscle coordination, disruptive, withdrawn, emotionally unpredictable and not able to make friends very easily, right? So poor peer relations. And so again, this is all looking back, right? So after someone's been diagnosed, looking back on some of the factors that have been clustered together of people with schizophrenia. Okay. All right. Lots to know on all this stuff. Again, make sure we know that the different subtypes, the symptoms, the rates, and the possible causes. And I will see you guys later.